From early retirement to the Premier League. From the second tier in Germany to the pinnacle of world football. From Bayern Munich's academy and German youth team to the youngest manager in the history of England's top flight. This is the incredible rise of Fabian Hürzeler. But to understand how he has got to this point today, we must go back to the very start. February 26, 1993, Houston, Texas, the United States. Thousands of miles from the bright lights of the Bundesliga, far from the tactical classrooms of the German academies, Fabian Hürzeler is born. His father is Swiss, his mother is German, and together they would soon return to Europe, to a city dominated by a singular footballing dynasty, Munich. From a young age, Fabian was immersed in the game. He joined Bayern's youth academy as a defensive midfielder. From day one, the reports were the same. He wasn't the fastest, he wasn't the flashiest, but he was different. They described him as tactically mature. Even at 14 or 15 years old, he had a rare ability to read the game, to anticipate movements before they happened, and to sense space and danger in ways that his others couldn't. And that gift of footballing vision would later be his best weapon as a coach. But back then, it was his tool for survival as a player. Because here's the truth, Fabian Hürzeler was never destined to be a Bundesliga superstar. But what he had was a brain for football much sharper than those around him. Which would mean that where he was really destined to belong was in the technical area. His youth career took him from Bayern to Hoffenheim and later to 1860 Munich. At Hoffenheim, a club already building its reputation as some sort of a laboratory for young talent, Fabian was exposed to innovative training methods, small-sided games, positional play, tactical drills that were ahead of their time, and it was there that he began absorbing not just how to play, but why certain things mattered. But by the time that he reached his early 20s, the reality set in. He was a good player, but not a great one. He bounced around the lower divisions playing for clubs like 1860 Munich, and he was solid, dependable, but not someone that the scouts were tipping for superstardom. And here's the turning point, the hook in Fabian's story. Whilst most players at that stage would keep grinding and hope for a late breakthrough, Fabian saw something different. He realised early that his ceiling as a footballer was not going to be right at the very top, but his ceiling as a manager, well, that just might be limitless. So, at just 23 years old, an age where most professionals are only just breaking into actual senior football, Fabian Hürzeler retired from playing. A decision that to outsiders looked to be giving up, but to him was simply a step forward. Because deep down, he already knew that his future was not on the pitch, but on the touchline. But before we dive into how he transformed that decision into one of football's most incredible coaching journeys, if you're enjoying the story so far, make sure you are subscribed. I'm trying to reach 1,000 subscribers and every single one is massively appreciated. Anyway, back to the video. Let's not skip past that decision too quickly. I mean, imagine the courage that it takes. You've spent your entire youth chasing the dream of becoming a professional footballer. You've worn the Bayern Munich badge as well as your own country's at this point, and you've sacrificed everything. And then in your early 20s, you stop. Not because you're broken, but because you were smart enough to recognize that your true gift lies elsewhere. But still, when he retired, the world didn't exactly open its doors. There were no massive Bundesliga job offers waiting. There were no youth teams begging for him to take over. What Fabian had was an ambition, knowledge, and a willingness to start from the very bottom. As a footballer, he lacked the elite athleticism, but as a coach, his tactical intelligence was priceless. And as a player, he couldn't dominate opponents with his body, but as a coach, he could dominate them with his mind. At 23, he didn't yet know how far it would take him, but he knew the journey was just beginning. Because within just a few years, Fabian Hürzeler would be going from being a lower league midfielder to leading his first club as a manager. And in that tiny Bavarian town with players barely older than himself, the story of one of football's boldest young tacticians began. When Fabian Hürzeler hung up his boots as a 23-year-old, it could have been the end of his story. But For him, it was, like I said, just the beginning. Because while he may not have had the career of a Bundesliga star, he had something perhaps even more valuable, the determination to translate his knowledge into leadership. And this is where his story takes its first real turn. His first roles came in German grassroots football, far away from the glamour of the top flight stadiums, small pitches, few resources, teams with a lot more enthusiasm than talent, but this is exactly what he needed. Coaching in these environments demanded creativity, adaptability, and above all, the ability to communicate. Imagine being barely older than the players you're managing. Imagine having to stand in front of them and command the respect that a manager should have and convince them that you, someone who had never actually played at the highest level, could lead them to something better. That was his challenge, and he embraced it. His big break came when he was brought into Germany's national youth setup. Suddenly, he wasn't just working with grassroots players, he was shaping some of the brightest young prospects in the country. As an assistant with the German under-18s and under-20s, Fabian had access to cutting-edge methods, elite facilities, and a chance to learn from some of the sharpest minds in the German FA. This was where his coaching education accelerated. He studied training methodology, opponent analysis, video scouting. He learned how to structure tactical plans not just for one game, but for a development pathway that could span years. He wasn't just a coach on the pitch, he was becoming a strategist. But there was another obstacle. In the hyper-competitive world of German coaching and football in general, credibility matters. And here was Fabian, barely in his mid-20s, without a glittering playing career to back him up. So how do you win respect? Well, you win it with preparation. You win it with ideas, and that's exactly what he did. Players quickly realized that under Fabian, training wasn't wasting time. They left sessions feeling sharper, smarter, more prepared. He had a way of explaining complex tactical concepts in simple but actionable terms. Instead of overwhelming his players, he was empowering them. And let's pause here for a second, because this is a critical moment in his journey. Many talented young managers get lost at this stage. They're full of theory, but they fail to be able to connect with the players to back it up. But Fabian avoided that trap. He understood football that isn't just about systems, it's about human beings. And by blending this tactical sharpness with empathy, he was able to start carving out a reputation. And by 29, he had already achieved what most coaches don't reach until their late 30s. He had respect inside Germany's elite coaching circles. But he was restless. He wanted more responsibility and he wanted to lead. He finally got that opportunity in 2020 when Fabian joined FC St. Pauli, initially as an assistant manager. Now, St. Pauli isn't just a normal football club, known worldwide for its radical politics, its working class roots, and its fiercely loyal ultras and fan base. St. Pauli is unlike any other team. And stepping into that environment as a young, relatively unknown coach is a bit of a gamble, but it was also the perfect fit. Still at this stage, he was just number 2, the assistant, the man behind the scenes. But soon, when the moment came, he would step out of the shadows and into center stage of one of the most remarkable transformations German football has seen in recent years. Every coach dreams of a moment that defines their careers, and for Fabian Hürzeler, that came in Hamburg's St. Pauli district. But the real twist came in December 2022. St. Pauli was struggling. Results had gone flat. Confidence was evaporating and they were in crisis. The club were just hovering above relegation. Timo Schultz, their head coach, was sacked. The club needed something radical. The board needed a new leader. And they looked at the 29-year-old assistant manager, yes, 29 years old, and handed him the keys. For most clubs, appointing someone this young is relatively unthinkable. Fabian wasn't just the youngest coach in the league, he was younger than some of the players in his own dressing room. But what happened next silenced every single doubter. From the moment Fabian took charge, St. Pauli were transformed. His football was aggressive, intense, suffocating. He introduced a high-pressing game that forced opponents into mistakes and onto the back foot. He drilled his players in structured build-up patterns, demanding bravery on the ball. And suddenly, a team that looked lifeless came very much so alive. But it wasn't just the football, it was the personality that comes with it. Fabian didn't strut into press conference, he didn't really play the media game, he was measured, he's composed, analytical. And the players, they swore by him. And all of this translated into something quite remarkable. As I said, within weeks, St. Pauli were transformed. Fabian tweaked their shape, made their pressing sharper, their build-up cleaner, their transitions faster. Training became more detailed, more intense, and players bought into the idea because it was clear that this wasn't someone bluffing his way through the system. This was a coach with actual ideas. From January to May 2023, St. Pauli went on a 10-game winning streak in the league, the best run in their history. The relegation battle was gone. Suddenly, they were knocking on the door of promotion. Fabian's football wasn't just effective, it was exciting. Brave possession play, relentless pressing, attacking with intelligence and courage. And though that season ended just shy of actually reaching the Bundesliga, the tone was set. Fabian had not only saved a club in crisis, he had rebuilt its entire identity. The following campaign of 2023-2024 was the real payoff. St. Pauli dominated the league, with one of the youngest coaches in Europe at the helm of it. They played fearless, attacking football, they pressed high, they rotated fluidly, and they scored goals that were not just effective, but spectacular. Match by match, their rise looked unstoppable, and by the end of the season, history was written. St. Pauli were promoted back to the Bundesliga for the first time in over a decade. A club that had been languishing, flirting with obscurity, and was reborn under the guidance of a coach that hadn't even turned 31 in such a short span. And for Fabian, the rewards were immediate. Suddenly he wasn't just the youngest coach in German football, he was one of the most talked about. Analysts praised his tactical sophistication, comparing him to Julian Nagelsmann, another managerial wonder kid who had quickly risen through the ranks. Clubs across Europe were watching closely. One of those being 600 miles away on the south coast of England, a Premier League club known for taking risks on visionary managers had been watching, and they weren't going to wait. Brighton and Hove Albion were about to make Fabian Hürzeler an offer that would change his life and his career forever. In recent years, Brighton had earned a reputation as football's disruptors. They had turned data into an art form. They had recruited players nobody else ever noticed and sold them for fortunes. And in the dugout, they had taken chances, most notably with sacking Chris Hughton and bringing in Graham Potter, and then, obviously, Roberto De Zerbi. But they were both relatively unknown when they arrived, both transforming Brighton for the better and into one of the most admired teams in the Premier League. And then, once De Zerbi had left, they did what was kind of expected, to be fair. Instead of going for a safe bet, they rolled the dice on a man that most English fans had never even heard of, Fabian Hürzeler. 31 years old, no top flight experience as a coach, and now the youngest permanent manager in Premier League history. For Fabian, this was the challenge of a lifetime. The Premier League isn't forgiving, it's not a place for experiments. Every mistake is magnified, every game is a global spectacle. Managers arrive with glowing reputations and can easily leave humbled. But Fabian didn't come to survive, he came to compete. And to do so, Brighton gave him the tools, a squad brimming with technical talent, young players eager to learn, and a recruitment system designed to unearth the next hidden gem. Fabian wasn't really walking into chaos, he was walking into a club perfectly aligned with his own philosophy, modern, progressive, and fearless. But make no mistake, this was also still a gamble. For Fabian, the margin of error was slim. In a league where every single position in the league table is the difference of millions of pounds, could a young coach handle this pressure? Could his bold football translate when every opponent was faster, stronger, smarter? Could he adapt when things went wrong, as they inevitably do at some point in the Premier League? As the cameras panned across the Amex Stadium that first season, one thing became clear. Fabian Hürzeler hadn't come to England just to fade into the background as some failed experiment. He had come to make history. Football is often called the beautiful game, but to Fabian Hürzeler, it's also a game of patterns, probabilities, and principles. So, what is Fabian Hürzeler's philosophy? At its core, it begins with courage. The courage to press high and the courage to take risks in possession. Take his pressing system. Fabian demands intensity, but not chaos. Every press is calculated, it's designed to funnel opponents into traps. The angles they're shut, the passing lanes vanish, the space that looked open a second ago is now closed. But here's where Fabian is a bit different from many young coaches. He isn't just obsessed with having possession for possession's sake, he believes in the control. And yes, control can mean many things. Sometimes it's having the ball, sometimes it's forcing the opponent into areas where they can do no damage, and sometimes it's knowing when to strike with sudden ruthless speed. Yet there's another layer to his genius: adaptability. Again, many young managers, they live and die by their philosophy. They refuse to bend, even when circumstances demand it. I mean, a little bit like we saw a couple years back with Marcelo Bielsa at Leeds. But Fabian is different. While he has his principles, he also has pragmatism. For example, a setup that clearly didn't work in a pretty massive way, that 7-0 loss away at Forest, ended with Fabian Hürzeler literally burning up the tactical notes. A pretty valid crash out considering the performance that there was that day, and I think that as fans we're all pretty thankful to know that that tactical setup will probably never see the light of day ever again. But regardless, being able to change in that way is what makes him dangerous. At 31 years old, most managers are assistants, analysts, or literally still playing professional football. I mean, there is a good amount of people in this Brighton squad that are older than him. But already, Fabian is starting to shape the Premier League. Imagine where his ideas could be at 40, 50, 60. What we're seeing now is not the peak, it's the foundations of a philosophy that could define a generation of Brighton's football. But every beginning comes with a risk. Every philosophy is tested, every idea is challenged. And in the Premier League, the tests don't wait, because philosophy can look beautiful in idea and on a whiteboard, but on a rainy Tuesday night in Manchester against the champions, against the greatest managers in the world, the question is always the same: can it win? Every great story has its obstacles, and for Fabian Hürzeler, the Premier League was never going to just roll out a red carpet because he had a bit of a fairy tale story. In England, the fairy tales don't last long. They're tested, they're pulled apart, and sooner or later, reality will come knocking. There's been some mistakes along the way, of course, and that has then led to pundits asking the same questions over and over. Is he too young? Does he have enough experience? And what happens when things go wrong? Some see him as a genius in waiting, others see him as a reckless experiment. But knowing Brighton, it's not really much reckless that goes on. It's all very, very meticulously planned out from the top. But still, every single dropped point is fuel on the debate. And to be honest, Brighton fans, like many others in English football, can be very reactionary. I mean, we've been pretty spoiled in recent years, punching above our weight. And when things have started to not work every now and then, there has definitely been a group of supporters that haven't really 100% backed him. But that's just the pressure of English football. That's just the pressure of football in general. Realistically, football doesn't care if Brighton have Fabian Hürzeler, the wonder kid manager, in charge, or a 60, 70-year-old that's proven. All that matters is if they can get results on the pitch and where they'll end up in the league at the end of the day. The story of Fabian Hürzeler is not anywhere near finished. In truth, it's barely really begun. At just 31 years old, he stands at the edge of something unprecedented. He has already achieved what most managers dream of and never even managed to get: a Premier League job. And he's got it with tactical respect and a very good growing reputation. And yet when we zoom out, we realize something extraordinary. He has a very long road ahead, and it's filled with questions. Can he turn Brighton into more than just a well-coached team? Can he make them contenders? Can he sustain his philosophy against the relentless churn of the Premier League? Can he even transform his ideas into trophies and his tactics into immortality? Could he one day stand on the touchline in the Champions League? Could he ever challenge 4 titles? Probably not at Brighton, unfortunately, as a Brighton fan, but could he in time come the kind of manager whose name is etched into history, spoken alongside the Klopps, the Guardiolas, even the Alex Fergusons? Let me know your thoughts in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, please do consider leaving a like and subscribing. As I mentioned before, every single one helps out massively on my goal to reach 1,000 subscribers. And with that being said, thank you very much, and fade to black.